Hello, good morning. Welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna, which, as I said previously, is going to be pre-recorded this week as I am running an event at the Highland Folk Museum. So perhaps I'm seeing some of the regular viewers there instead of here. So my name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I am the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. The Highland Archive Service has 4 archive centres across the Highlands of Scotland, one in Inverness, one in Wick, one in Fort William and one in Portree. And together these make up the Highland Archive Service. This series of talks is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in the Learn with Lorna series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we would very, very much appreciate that. And there's a link to be able to do so both on Facebook and on YouTube, wherever you're watching. So as I said, this week, pre-recorded, so hopefully you have found it okay. This episode is looking not at a particular collection or a particular place, but at a theme, links with America. Because as I have worked with these collections over the years, there are so many links into various parts of America. Now, the UK, of course, has a strong historical connections with America, particularly North America, through our colonisation and settlement, through wars, through politics, through emigration, through shared culture, wars both with each other and against each other, incidentally, and so many other reasons that we have a shared and intertwined history. Over the centuries, the two countries have shared many stories. About 25% of the visitors to the Highland Archive Centre alone, so that's the centre in Inverness, last year were from America. So around a quarter of those who came to our door last year were from America, the vast majority of whom were tracing their family history, a journey that has brought them from America to the Highlands and to the Highland Archive Centre. Probably someone watching this will be watching it because of a connection that goes back decades or centuries. So we know that these connections exist. We know that we have this long link between the nations. But where can we see it in our collections and what can we see evidence of? I'm going to look at some examples that will hopefully illustrate some of those different links that I've talked about around shared culture, around conflict, around emigration and settlement and colonisation. Let's start then with that, with the fact that Britain, as we'll call it for ease, although it wasn't Britain at the time, colonised and ruled over large parts of America from the beginning of the 1600s through to the late 1700s, as did Spain and France, various European nations. This establishment of the European colonies, so places like Virginia, like North Carolina, Georgia, and so on, brought hardship and brought devastation to the Native Americans who were already living on that land, and it would soon involve the horrendous enslavement of both Native Americans and Africans to work on that land. I wanted to start with that just by saying I am in no way diminishing the severity or the importance of that part of the story, but because I'm telling stories from our collections, I'm not going to go into that in a huge amount of detail, purely because it's not hugely represented within our collections. But these colonies that we started in the early 1600s needed people. And for the next 200, 300 years, people went in vast numbers from the Highlands and Islands to work on these new colonies for a chance of owning a piece of land, but also because of the clearances that were happening back in the Highlands meant that for many, going to the New World, going to North America was the best option. The 1794 first statistical account for Loch Alsh notes that there has been considerable emigration from this country to North America in 1770 alone. The 1792 statistical account for Duranish and Skye says from August 1771 to October 1790, 8 large transports have sailed from this island with emigrants to seek settlements in America. These 8 ships have, at a very moderate computation, carried away from this island 2,400 souls. And it's still reflected 50 years later in the second statistical accounts. So, for instance, 1845, Lagan, many of the inhabitants have emigrated into America. 1845 for North Uist, upwards of 600 souls have emigrated in 1828 to British America. I've mentioned before, and it is one of the most descriptive and I can't think what's the word I'm looking for, but it creates such a sharp vision. The description that Dr. Johnson gave of a dance called America, I've spoken about it before, where he talks about a dance, something like Strip the Willow, where more and more people became involved in swirling each other around until eventually the whole community was involved. And the dance was called America to represent how immigration caught on and spread throughout the whole community. And so we find ourselves in the mid-1770s with thousands of Highland settlers setting out for the New World, either to work, to make money, to improve their prospects, to escape from poverty and hardship at home, to follow others, because they felt like they had no choice. There's such a range of reasons that people went. And among them was Flora MacDonald, who many of you will be familiar with because of her role in helping Bonnie Prince Charlie escape from Lewis to Skye on his way out to Europe after the Battle of Culloden. And she had gone from Skye to Cheeks Creek in North Carolina. And I knew a little bit about this, but not a huge amount until I worked last weekend at an event to do with this book, Pretty Young Rebel, written by Flora Fraser, who was named after Flora MacDonald, incidentally. And it's Flora MacDonald's life story from Culloden through to her emigration to America and her subsequent return back to the Highlands and Islands. So that's just one example of so many thousands of people who took that journey from Skye, from the Western Isles, from the Highlands to America. I mentioned that she settled at Cheeks Creek in North Carolina, and we have documents across our collections, across our offices, that describe the experiences of some of those who went in the years before the War of Independence. One collection, D928, which is a Gallic Society collection, includes various documents, indentures and various other pieces of documentation that record parcels of land being allocated to Highland settlers in North Carolina and in Cheeks Creek in Anson County, North Carolina. So I wanted to share a couple of extracts from some of these documents that date pre-American War of Independence. This is an example of a deed of agreement from 1770. It is cut at the top, it has a wavy top line, and that's because it's an indenture where one person would have kept one half and someone else would have kept the other, and they would fit them together again to show that it was part of the same contract. And it says North Carolina, Anson County. This indenture made on the 4th day of October 1770 between Samuel Williams on the one part and Henry Williams on the other part. Witness that the said Samuel Williams, for and in consideration of the sum of £51 10 shillings lawful money, and it goes, so that's the money that he has paid. It then goes on with some very legal terminology, but says that for this money he has been given to his heirs and his assignees forevermore 127 acres of land, to the same more or less lying in the government and county aforesaid on the Townsend fork of the Cheeks Creek east of Little River, beginning at a small white oak on the eastern side of a small gut near the southern side of the said fork, and running thence east to the top of a high hill called the Long Mountain of the said fork, and running thence east to the top of a high hill. So it goes on, describes in detail exactly what this parcel of land is, what he has paid for it, and what his entitlement is and what his heirs are entitled to. So really extraordinary. I mean, not surprising in an archive that we would have it, but extraordinary for me, having just read this biography of Flora MacDonald, to then look in our collections and see we have evidence of the land, the type of land, the size of land, who was buying it in the same community. Quite fascinating. I found in that same collection this document, which many family historians will envy. As soon as I read it, I thought, oh, that's the sort of thing every family historian dreams of. North Carolina, Anson County, May the 12th, 1777. My father, Alexander MacDonald, tacksman of Sarthill, in the island of Skye, North Britain, parted this life on the 24th of January, 1751. My brother, Donald MacDonald, parted this life October the 15th, 1744. My eldest brother, Angus MacDonald of Sarthill, died the 12th of May, 1751, without issue, except one natural girl called Janet, so an illegitimate daughter. She married one John McKinnon, I think, it's ripped, but I think it's John McKinnon, and after his death married Angus Bruce. My mother, Mrs. Margaret MacDonald of Sarthill, daughter to Sorley MacDonald of Sarthill, the lawful son of the great Sir James MacDonald of Macdonald. And then again, there's a rip, but it says, parted this life October 1773 and is buried at Sorley MacDonald, her youngest son's plantation, called Sarthill, on Cheeks Creek, in the foresaid county and province. The said Sorley MacDonald was married August the 6th, 1765, to Florrie Nicholson, eldest daughter of John Nicholson, tacksman of Scorrybreck in the Isle of Skye and parish of Portree. Issue by her born in Britain, viz. Mary, born at Sarthill in Skye on the 28th of July 1766. John, born ditto on the 12th of June 1767. Alexander, born at ditto October the 30th, 1768. And Anne, born at Sarthill, the 24th of February 1770. So far you might be saying, why am I talking about that? Because it's all about what's happening in Skye. But the final paragraph says, the aforesaid Sorley MacDonald, together with the rest of his friends, transported themselves from Portree in Skye on the 7th of August 1771 aboard a Glasgow brig called the Liberty for North Carolina, America, and landed safe at Cape Fear on the 20th of December 1771, buried one child on our passage, written by me, Sorley MacDonald. That's just wonderful, isn't it, that to have that record. And he went on to have a very interesting life, and I think fought in the Wars of Independence, and I think died at a great age of over 100. So those are the people who went, arguably of their own accord, but not everybody did. Some were transported to America after playing a role in the Jacobite risings or for a punishment for a crime. So we can also find within our High Court documents frequent reference to individuals being sent, banished, transported to work on one or other of His Majesty's plantations in America as a punishment for a crime. So for instance, in 1773, Isabel and Christian Ross were transported for 14 years for stealing meal. In 1768, the transportation for life of George Weir, who was a tailor in Sarclett in Caithness. I can read some of this to you to explain what the punishment was, what the sentence was. The said Lords of Justice Clerk, so it's listing the names of the people who have been taking this decision, says they have considered the petition given in and presented for the said George Weir. They are being read over in court and judicially heard, adhered to by him. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. I'm also reading it from the original 1700s, which is, I haven't typed it. So they've read over his plea essentially in court. But it says that they discern and adjudge the said George Weir to be banished and hereby banish him to one or either of His Majesty's plantations in America during all of the days of his life. It goes on to say that he should be held until there's an opportunity for transporting him. But when the opportunity comes, he should be sent to one or other of His Majesty's plantations in America. And it says that the people who deliver him there should get a certificate under the hand of the proper officer of the said plantation of his being so landed. So they need proof that he's been delivered to America with the date and the day and the year that he's been landed there, under the penalty of £10 sterling. So they need evidence that he has been safely landed and not escaped anywhere en route. It goes on to say that they have that this certificate and this landing of him gives, let me find the exact wording, gives caution so that they may have a property and interest in the service of the said George Weir for the space of 7 years after the date hereto, with certification to him that if he shall ever return or be found again in Scotland at any time during his life, he will be whipped through the streets on 50 strips on his naked back and then put back in jail and transported again. So interesting there of that evidence that he's banished for life, but that for 7 years people are entitled to the use of him on a plantation. Incidentally, something that we don't have many of, but which I found within that bundle of documents, is a physical description of him, because someone is writing saying that the jail is full, please can we start transporting people? And someone writes back and says, can you give us a list of all those waiting for transportation and a description of them? And it says that he is 19 years old and he is 5'6". Incidentally, within our court records, there are also other documents that prevent people from going to America until they've paid their debts. So people who have decided to emigrate and other people saying, wait, don't let them out the country, they owe me money. So just really interesting, all the different dynamics at play here. I've touched very briefly on the fact that Britain's relationship with its American colonies became much more fraught in the 1700s, the late 1700s. And there were numerous reasons for this, in part due to the fact that for generations Britain had largely left the colonies alone to get on with things, but now started to progressively interfere in the decision-making. And then on top of this, the British government, who had been fighting the 7 Years' War, needed money. They had been running and fighting a war that was costing them a substantial amount of money, and so they needed revenue. They also wanted to support the interests of the East India Company. And so they looked at new taxes that they could put on the colonies. So, for instance, the Stamp Act, which was a tax on all paper documents in the colonies. The other one, which you may be familiar with, is the Tea Act, which gave the East India Company a monopoly on importing tea to the colonies and on selling tea within the colonies. Both of these acts brought riots. But it was the Tea Act, really. And I remember learning about the Tea Act in school, which is funny. I'm sure that any Americans watching will definitely have learned it in school, but I would imagine it's less common for me, for a school where I went to have learned it. But I remember being taught about it. And it was the Tea Act that really brought things to a head to some extent, because the colonists went aboard those East India Company ships in Boston and threw the tea overboard, what became known as the Boston Tea Party. And this was in December 1773, and it was to prove a turning point, with the wars starting shortly afterwards. Really interesting. I found a reference to the Boston Tea Party, or the Boston Incident, within a letter in our Fraser Tytler collection. And it says this. He's talking about all different things, writing to Alexander Tytler, and then he says, "There's nothing new to write that you won't have in the public papers. Government has received accounts from America of the late affair at Boston, but the particulars are not yet made public. It hasn't created much alarm, and the stocks have been little affected." Really, so many interesting things about that document. The reference, as we would see it now in the news, to any time there's any kind of big wave of announcement, that they'll look to the stock markets to see how they've reacted. So reference there to that. But also the fact that the author, Robert White, thinks that there haven't been many ramifications. it really was one of the final straws, and the unhappiness that had been building in the colonies over the past decades really were about to spill over into the American Revolutionary Wars, the Wars of Independence, when 13 states under British control rose up against imperial rule. And we have letters that mention mass emigration to America continuing despite this. So the Revolutionary Wars are happening. Eventually, of course, America would gain its independence. But despite this, people are still sort of gaily setting off from the Highlands and Islands to America and seeing it as this promised land, or this land of hope and potential. And we have letters that talk about that mass emigration, despite the feeling that probably America might not, might be trying to break away from Britain. There's also documents that give an insight into the level of conflict and the way that the new settlers there had to take sides. And again, if you're interested in reading Pretty Young Rebel, you'll find out about that, about how Flora MacDonald and her husband went from being supporters of the Jacobite risings in Scotland to going to America and fighting on the government side. So there was that enforced decision that people had to make to take sides. And so these are some of the documents that illustrate that. This one, written in New York in, I think, 1775, the date is very scrawled. Sir, by virtue of the commission I hold as Colonel Commandant of the British Legion, I do hereby authorise and require you to proceed to such parts of the continent of North America as shall appear to you most expedient for the service and for the good of the service, and there to raise and enlist your complement of able-bodied active recruits as lieutenant in the said corps. You are to enlist your men to serve for 3 years or during the war, to offer the King's bounty, and in all respects to be governed by His Majesty's orders already issued for the reputation of provisional forces, for the regulation of provisional forces. You are to join the Legion by the 1st day of March 1775, as soon thereafter as circumstances will permit. So that expectation that you will go, that you will rise for your country, but you will support the government side and obey any order issued by His Majesty's government. The next one here is from 1776, and it says, and this is really interesting, so it talks about an incident. I'll read it to you. Gentlemen, being here with a detachment of the regiment under my command, and having in orders from His Excellency the President and Council of this colony to treat such of your people as I should meet with, so as to impress them with the most solid assurance of the friendly disposition of this government towards them, how earnestly it wishes to hold them as brethren and fellow citizens, and to persuade them that their true interests are as much concerned in the present contest between Great Britain and America as is ours, or the interest of any other set of men on this continent now struggling for the rights of mankind. This colony laments the unhappy mistake that some of your people were lately drawn into, and the dreadful consequence that followed. I beg you would believe, gentlemen, that I shall esteem it the happiest incident of my life to be the instrument of bringing about that cordiality and friendship so material for your peace, happiness, and safety, and earnestly wished for by this government. Wherefore I again entreat you that some of the 3 or 4 of you will favour me with a visit to this place. Your most obedient, humble servant, G.G. Powell. So there's an element there. There had been several incidents where Scottish settlers had risen up in defiance, and then trying to control that, to say you will support the government side. So, of course, the result of all of this conflict and this upheaval was the creation of the United States. But as I said before, despite this, emigration continued strong, and we hold so many documents that talk about those experiences into the 1800s. And I've done a previous Lorna on emigration, particularly stories of migration and emigration. So I'm not going to read the letters that I have read there already. But I wanted to share some with you that I haven't shared previously. And the first one I want to share comes from our Lochaber archives. This is a new collection which has only just come in, and it's a letter from 1865 in which the writer tells his parents back in Scotland about life and occasions and happenings, both normal and abnormal. I'm going to miss out a section of it because it has some very strong anti-Semitism in it that I am not at all comfortable with reading aloud. So I'm going to read parts of this to you. Things have assumed all sorts of shapes since my arrival here. Could get employment every day that I breathe if I chose to. I was offered no less than 2 situations yesterday, which I did not accept. He goes on to say, I have been employed in law office for the last week at $2 per day, filling out blanks and writing. And more than that, I have been offered a situation as conductor on a streetcar, which I refused on account of the small pay and long hours. $2 per day and work from 6 in the morning till 12:30 at night. Sounds horrendous. But he goes on to say, so that's all normal, looking at work, looking at wages, what's happening, what's the state of affairs. But perhaps something much more unusual. Things are in a horrible state here concerning the death of our dearly beloved president. This is the assassination of Lincoln. I never was so thunderstruck in my life as when informed of the assassination of the chief executive. No sooner was the report confirmed than all flags were lowered to half-mast and crape and black were visible from every window and portico in this city. A more imposing scene I have never witnessed. Everything was in dire confusion, all suspended for a day. There's a tear in the page, so I would imagine it's something like all trading or something like that was suspended for the day. Stores of every description, down to even barbers' shops, saloons, and in fact everything, was done to make the city appear as one vast multitude of mourning mortals. Nothing could be described, but knots of men scattered or gathered promiscuously at every corner, discussing the details of the unfortunate president. It's really beautifully written, I think. Scores of anxious, breathless, and indignant atoms of humanity hung around the bulletin on Seneca Street to watch the arrival of the official of E.M. Stanton to confirm the report of the first dispatch. At last it comes. Still the crowd increases, and men that were anxious a short time before become doubly so now, each moment as an hour. And the message ran as follows. The president lies mortally wounded, will scarcely remain alive till morning, particulars soon. 5 hours later, the president expired at 7:22. Never has a Buffalo community received a shock equal to the one experienced by them that morning. Men that were his avowed enemies before were now his warmest supporters. But now for the day of his interment, the city was decorated with flags at half-mast twined with crape. The bells tolled for 2 long hours, guns were fired, and in fact, the wildest excitement prevailed. Every denomination in the vicinity was out. Freemasons, Sons of Erin, Dutch clubs, and the devil only knows who were out. Bands of music played the dirge, military companies, cavalry fire companies, and in fact to depict the change of dress and the different arrangements of the different sects would take more than 2 sheets. The entire procession formed on Niagara Square and was just 1 hour and 10 minutes in passing. A stately hearse, tastefully decorated, drawn by 6 white steeds draped in black, and each horse led by a gentleman of colour. Interesting. In fact, nothing that I can say would compete with the splendour of entire day's arrangements. Day after tomorrow, Thursday, the President's Corps is to pass through the city and is to remain here from 7:00 in the morning till 10 in the evening. Yes, I hadn't picked up before on that implication about who was drawing the hearse, which is, again, uncomfortable to read. So he describes those things that are not only normal but abnormal. So the assassination of Lincoln and the shock waves that sent through Buffalo. I've spoken before about the fact that we have some documents that detail the journeys of some of those who chose to go to America in the 18 and 1900s. Again, I've read many of them before, so I won't share those. But here's an example from Nucleus, from the wonderful Wick Society collection, which is in the process of being catalogued, the diary of William Ray. William Ray was born in 1859 in Wick Parish, and in the 1881 census, we can see him in Caithness in Staxigo at the age of 21, living with his parents and being recorded as a farmer. But in 1888, he decided to leave Caithness and make for America, via Glasgow, Quebec, and right across Canada to Vancouver, then down to Seattle and San Francisco. Quite an enormous journey. So thank you to the Nucleus team for all the brilliant, insightful extracts that they sent to me. I could have chosen any of them, but I'm going to try and summarise most of it and then read some of it. And I'm conscious I'm going to go over time, so I'm sorry for that. There are great descriptions in William Ray's diaries of the dangers on board. Accidents due to bad weather, the compulsory vaccination of all passengers to avoid infectious disease, or the enforced quarantine if not. And his descriptions of his arrival are beautiful when he arrives in Quebec, seeing the colonists' sleeping cars, which were the train carriages with seats that folded down into beds. The journey takes him from North Bay to Heron Bay on Lake Superior, through the grain markets of Manitoba and on to Vancouver, which he describes as a beautiful little town of 2 years' growth with a population of 5,200. I don't know if anyone is watching in Vancouver can give us updated statistics. I've been to Vancouver. It is still a beautiful place, but substantially more than 5,000 people now. Here are some of the extracts towards the end of William's journey. Monday, the 4th of June. We opened our eyes this morning on what appeared to me to be the finest part of the whole country. As far as the eye could reach, all around it is level as a billiard table. In fact, it has been all the way from Winnipeg the same. But strange to say, there is not much farming to be seen, owing to the land along the line being held by speculators for 1 mile on each side of the line. By their high process, they drive the farmer further back, where they can get it on much easier terms from the government. Another reason why there is not much farming along the line is that the grain catch fire sometimes from passing trains and destroy great quantities of it. The extreme heat in summer along with the drought makes it very combustible. We passed the celebrated Bell Farm today at Saint-Aluta. I'm sure someone will correct me. Embracing 100 square miles. Bell Farm, 100 square miles. The furrows on this farm are usually 4 miles long, and one of another back is half a day's work for a man and a team. It is supposed to be the largest farm in the world. In harvest time, they have 20 self-binding reapers at work, one after the other. Tuesday, the 5th of June. When we got up this morning, we were in the midst of the Rocky Mountains. For a more wilder and terror-striking route no railway could take. The enormous mountains to be seen from the carriage, wondrous in every direction, thousands of feet high, covered with snow on the top. In some, the line is cut along the sides of the mountain like a shelf, and hundreds of feet below, the water rushing with tremendous noise, and also crossing the rivers and channels on wooden bridges, some of them hundreds of feet high, and 10, 1,100 feet long. The bridges are all wood, whether across river, lake, or plain. There are wooden bridges used in some parts of the plains where it is not level and where it is soft and marshy. The scenery of the Rocky Mountains and the terror-striking route of this railway is a sight that can never be forgotten by anyone taking this journey. Really descriptive. Friday, the June 8th, arrived at Seattle this morning at 6 o'clock. It is a thriving town with a great number of sawmills all around. This is the first part of the United States that I have ever been in. Monday, the 11th, arrived at San Francisco this morning at 7 o'clock after a long and wearisome journey of 23 days from Glasgow, with a total distance of 6,573 miles. And now, including my diary of a trip from Glasgow to San Francisco, I would ask the reader to excuse my mistakes and lay them down to my misfortune and not my fault. I am yours very truly, William Ray, 1516 Alcatraz Avenue, Berkeley, California. My colleagues at Nucleus put a note on the end for me to say that there was a marriage announcement for William. Appeared in the Northern Ensign, which is a Wick newspaper, in 1896, saying that he married Miss Lorna Falkenstein, a charming young lady, and says that the groom is a first-class cooper with steady employment in San Francisco. So just very interesting there to read. Again 23, a long journey of 23 days. But if we'd gone back a few years, into those earlier journeys at 1600, how much longer and much more dangerous would that journey have been? I mentioned that in the Wars of Independence, Britain and America fought in opposition. But of course, two of the biggest conflicts of the 20th century, those countries were on the same side. And we can find reminders of this right throughout our collections. School logbooks talking about the American naval base coming, American troops coming in the First World War. Letters that talk about the evacuation of children from Britain to America in the Second World War. We have papers relating to Joseph Hazlitt, who enlisted in the US Navy in 1917. He was placed on USS Swallow, a minesweeper assigned to support the laying of the Northern Mine Barrage, which was around 50,000 mines laid at sea to deter the German ships and U-boats from sinking supply ships. While supporting this work, Joseph spent time in Inverness, where he was supporting Base 18, which was based here. And he met and married while he was here Jenny Russell of Muirton Street in Inverness. And when he was discharged from the Navy in 1920, the couple moved to America. And so we have papers of a mass coming of Americans to Highlands, something like the naval bases coming en masse, and the impact that had on the community. But also one person's papers and photographs describing how for him that was a life-changing moment. He met his wife, they returned to America, they have descendants who have given us these papers. And the sea, of course, also brought Britain and America together in World War II. In late September 1942, the port of Rapster in Caithness landed dozens of American survivors of vessels that had been sunk in war operations. There are many stories again that I could have told from World War II, but I want to tell this one, which my colleagues from Nucleus put together for me. So in September 1942, as I said, the port of Rapster landed and looked after dozens of Americans. They had been sunk on ships that were part of the Arctic convoy PQ-18. Now, the Arctic convoys, as many of you may know, comprised Allied ships supporting Russia by sending supplies via sea around the north of Norway. This was an extremely dangerous route, a narrow passage that took them between the solid Arctic ice and the German bases in Norway. So it's a dangerous narrow channel. There are also gale force winds, extreme severe cold, icebreakers required, just a horrendously difficult job. And many ships were lost on the Arctic convoys. And here's an extract from a police report from Thursday, dated the 27th of September 1942, written by Inspector Cormac. Sir, I beg to report that on Saturday the 26th instant, 25 survivors, 4 British and 21 American merchant seamen were landed at Scrabster by the SS Gulfstone. These seamen were members of the crews of the following British and American ships which were sunk by enemy action when the convoy to which they were attached was attacked off Archangel at 3:40 p.m. on the 13th by enemy submarines and bombers. The convoy was outbound to Russia with supplies. American ships sunk the SS John Penn, 10,000 tons, owned by the Maritime Commission. Survivors, 18 officers and men. SS Oregonian, 10,000 tons, owned by the Maritime Commission. Survivors, 3 seamen. Medical officer, health, the public assistance officer, immigration officer, and Mr. Munro, agent for the Shipwreck Mariners Society, were informed. And after being cared for at the Pentland Hotel, Thursday, 22 survivors, 1 British and 21 American, travelled south by the 8 p.m. train on the 26th. The remaining three British survivors travelled to their homes on Shetland. More American survivors were landed at Scrabster on the 30th of October. And then the following February, 12 American merchant seamen were landed at Scrabster after their ship was torpedoed off Greenland. And again they were cared for at the Pentland Hotel before heading south by train. There are extracts in our collections too, which of course, I'm conscious I've talked about conflict, I've talked about enforced colonisation, but there are extracts in our collections too that talk about people visiting America for work and for leisure. So for instance, in our collection D171, there's references to the Reverend Norman MacLeod writing back to his family about his tour of America. In the Tommy McPherson collection, which I've done a Lorna on, there are tickets and itineraries and photographs of trips to America in the 1990s and 2000s. In Lochaber, we have correspondence and papers relating to business trips to South America and diaries from the Cameron Head Real collection. Diaries describe trips to North America in the 1900s. So a wealth of material. So I just wanted to bring that in at the end to go. Now, of course, we associate America with a place to go on holiday, a place where people come from America, the Highlands, there's a shared connection, there's culture. And that is reflected in the collection as well. Finally, to bring it back to right where I started with that start colonisation in the 1600s. In D1443, the Mary Beath collection, which again I've done an episode on, she was a herbalist and writer interested in traditional medicine. There are volumes that she collected within that collection relating to Native American medicine and traditions. So I'm sorry I've gone over. Hopefully that gives an insight into some of the ways that our collection shed light on the connection between the Highlands and America. I could have done several episodes on this, but hopefully it's given you a little taste of the information we have. Thank you for joining me. Next week I'll be back live with the Highlands Medical Service. Fantastic story. Thank you for listening. Forgive me for my slightly croaky throat and being a little bit stumbly. I'm not feeling 100%. So I've got through it. So I hope you've enjoyed it. And I'll look forward to speaking to you next week. A reminder that this series is brought to you by Highland at no cost to the viewer. Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. If you're able to donate towards our work, then we're truly grateful for that. Thank you.